Coming May 30th, 2026 to Nashville, Michigan. It's Ghostorama Nashville. Coming to you from the Foxview Event Center in Nashville, located at 975 Main Street. We will have spooky vendors, food vendors, activities for the little hunters in our lives. This is a look at para-unity at its best. Skeptics, believers, non-believers, debunkers, the general public. It is a deep dive into the supernatural and the paranormal. We will have 3 public speaking engagements at noon, 1 and 2. Vendor spaces are limited indoors at $35 and outdoors unlimited at $25. The show will be followed by an after-hours ghost hunt at one of Nashville's top 100 locations. The price for the after-hours ghost hunt is $30 for the first person in your team and $20 for each additional team member. Come and join us May 30th, 2026 for Ghostorama. Or always wonder what truly hides in the dark. Ghostorama is sponsored by Southern Michigan Paranormal's Frankenfest, Paranormal Pulp Investigations, Jesse Joan of Arc, and the Midwest Parahistoric Society.
Welcome back, Paranormal Papa Podcast, episode 31, coming to you from Ferocious Feline Studios in Cassopolis, Michigan. Folks, this week we have a special episode of the podcast. We have the great Vic Curdiff of Dogman Encounters Radio. Now, in this episode, he is going to be sharing 4 different stories from 4 different locations around the country of Dogman encounters. These stories are going to be shared firsthand by the people who encountered them. And I'll be honest, some of these stories will definitely make the hair on the back of your neck raise up. Now, I used to believe that the Dogman was something that was indigenous, is that the right word, to only the Great Lakes region here in North America. But much as with Bigfoot and some of these other mysterious cryptids, is being seen more and more all around the country. Check this out. We'll talk more at the end.
I'm 23. My family and I moved to Michigan from the West Coast about 14 or 15 years ago when I was 9, and we've been here ever since.
I never have lived there, but for various reasons I've spent some time there, and it really is a beautiful place. Having said that, what was it like when you came to that sudden realization that a lot of the things that you've been told about how the world works are untrue?
I guess it wasn't kind of like a show-stopping moment where it all cumulatively came down and I realized nothing was how I thought it was. It all just slowly built up, and I just kind of realized that maybe the world isn't how I thought it was, and things that people say aren't real actually exist.
When you're growing up and your parents are trying to convince you that monsters don't exist, there's no reason to be looking under your bed every night when you are ready to go to sleep. You trust your parents, so you want to believe them. You grow up, you don't see any evidence that there are monsters out there, but unfortunately, when someone like you has an encounter that proves to you that they do exist, that's really got to have a way of turning your world upside down. What was it like when you suddenly came to the realization that monsters do in fact exist?
The world just kind of stopped for me. It made everything feel very unsafe.
It would have to be a life-altering experience. If you know that they're out there, then what else is out there that we're told does not exist? Are vampires real? Are any of the other things like that out there that are in our legends, are they real also? It really makes you wonder. You live in a unique area. Most of the people who run into these things, they have their encounters because they go someplace, they say they went hunting or they went camping. They went someplace to get into the woods, they had their encounter. After that encounter, they leave. That's not the case with you. Without talking about your actual encounter, please tell us about the area around your home, since you do live where you had your encounter in the first place.
I live in a very small farm town of less than 5,000 people, and sort of directly in the middle of our town, we have about 20 miles of forest. And my home is 20 feet in front of this forest. So we live very, very close to it. And we get hunters coming in every season to come hunt. So the woods here are always packed, and you're always hearing guns going off or some kind of ruckus back there. But it is a very solitary place.
Do you know how many people listening would kill to have 20 miles of forest, 20 feet behind their bedroom wall? That's got to be amazing.
It sounds nice until you realize monsters are real.
Yeah, that is a good point. Once you realize the dogmen are out there having that wood so close, I guess that wouldn't be a good thing.
Nope, not anymore.
If that forest is 20 miles across, is it some form of a national preserve, a park? What's the story on that?
I don't think there's an actual name. I do know that it's been split up, and a lot of people own different chunks of the forest. So it's not like one big area owned by one person. It's split up across multiple people.
Being such a large area, do you know of any situations where people came up missing back there? Or do you know of any sightings of strange creatures back there, maybe?
I've never heard any stories about people seeing anything back there, but every now and then you'll hear a hunter talk about hearing something weird, or the forest just going completely silent all of a sudden. But you don't hear too many reports of people seeing things.
Even if it did happen, they probably wouldn't come forward and talk about it. But let's get into this first encounter, McKenna. Please tell us all the details that come to mind, beginning with why you were at the location of the encounter in the first place.
The way my house is situated, my bedroom is at the very back of the house, meaning it's the closest to the woods. And I have several large windows that face directly towards the forest. And my bedroom is about 15 to 20 feet away from the tree line. So it was probably about 7, 8 in the morning in spring of 2013. And I had just kind of woken up for the day. I was still a little half asleep. And I'm just relaxing, trying to wake up. And just out of nowhere, I hear what at first sounded like a St. Bernard or some sort of large dog just losing it at something. That kind of woke me up out of my lucid state. So at that point, I was fully awake and looked out my window because I couldn't quite place the sound. So I was just continuing to listen. And I heard the bark again. And the more this larger dog barked, the more I could hear that it was a very large animal. In between these howls and barks of this larger dog, I can hear, it almost sounded like if a chihuahua could scream. It was a very odd sound. If you've ever heard a dog fight, it was almost exactly like that. So I'm kind of listening to this back and forth of this just monster dog doing something to this little dog. It sounds about 5 feet from my window because I can hear everything, and I can hear the deepness of the larger dogs growling in my chest. I listened to this continue for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then it stopped, just as quick as it started. There was no tapering off, or you'd hear a hurt animal kind of whimper and run away. There was nothing like that. There was growling, there was screaming, and then it stopped, and it was gone. I just laid in bed for a few more minutes. I had no desire to look out the window, so I didn't. I just moved on and woke up a little bit more, took some time to kind of think about what I had just heard. And once my family was awake, I asked if anyone had heard a dog fight or, little dogs yipping in the yard, and no one had heard anything. So later in the day, maybe around 2 or 3, I kind of buck up the courage and I go outside to look around. I'm walking around my house, so now I'm in complete full view of the tree line. There's very small tufts of grass kind of lifted up that would make me think it was a rabbit or maybe a coyote, but there was no blood, there was no fur, there was no signs of violence that would make me think what I had heard that morning had actually happened. It was just a normal scene. None of my neighbors seemed to be out there looking around or alarmed. So I'm kind of thinking I was the only one who heard this event.
Did you ever hear from your neighbors that any of them were missing any small dogs, maybe?
Well, we had a family that lived down the road that had a lot of chihuahuas, but they never reported anything. So I'm kind of at a loss on that one.
That is really strange. Makes you wonder what that was all about. We haven't gotten into the second encounter or any of the other strange things that have happened at your property, but I wanted to throw this question at you anyway. Have you ever gotten frustrated that you seem to be the only person in your house who hears these things going on?
Oh yeah, it's extremely frustrating. I'm constantly being teased about hearing the werewolf in the backyard, or my boyfriend, the werewolf, is outside. It's annoying.
Yeah, that would be pretty frustrating. Common sense had to tell you, no, don't part the drapes and look out there and call attention onto yourself. But after the fact, as you have a chance to think about things like this, when curiosity has a chance to get the best of you, it's easy to kind of second guess your actions. Did you ever wind up regretting not looking out there after all and finding out once and for all what was going on?
Yeah, I do regret that.
Regretting it and deciding to act differently if the situation happened again, those are two totally different things. If that ever does happen again, do you think you will look out the window?
Oh yeah, definitely. I have my camera and everything ready.
Be careful what you wish for.
For sure.
When you told your family members about what you had heard and any ideas on what you thought it might have been out there, what kind of a response did you get?
They didn't really believe me. They kind of thought I was just dreaming and woke up. But once I explained that I was actually fully awake and kind of laid out the encounter for them, they seemed to believe me a little bit more, but not to the point where they would help me look for anything. Just like, oh, okay, it was a dog fight. That's about it.
So their curiosity was piqued, but not enough to cause them to go out there and want to help you look for any evidence and clues to find out what exactly had happened.
Yeah, and I think that's because I was the only person to experience it. If my whole family had experience, they would all be out there. But as I was trying to relay the event, I could just tell that they weren't interested.
I see. When you were growing up, did you have an interest in Bigfoot, things that go bump in the night, or anything else like that?
Not too much. I've always grown up around forests, so I've always been outside and playing, and I've never been scared or had thoughts that there were monsters in the woods or anything like that.
After you had your second encounter, without giving any details on what happened there yet, did you dive headlong into researching the Dogman topic, or did you just want to distance yourself from the topic the best you could?
No, I definitely started looking into it. Actually, once I had that encounter, I realized that dogmen were kind of Michigan's thing. I'd never heard of a dogman, never even seen anything about one until after I had my encounter. And that just really got me into looking into it and see if maybe what I had saw was a dogman.
After you started researching the Michigan Dogman and found out that there were so many sightings of them around you in your area, did that freak you out more than you already were? Or since you were hungry for information, was it kind of a good thing to find out that so many people in your area were seeing these things?
Definitely a little bit of both.
It might seem like a no-brainer that anyone that is asked that question would say, oh no, I was freaked out and hated the idea that so many of these things were being seen around me. But you have to take into consideration there are a lot of people who, instead of trying to distance themselves from dogmen as much as they can, they actually go out looking for them. A lot of them go out alone, so you never really know how someone's going to react after they find out that dogmen are real.
I was definitely interested to look up more and see if I could find out more about this thing, but I wasn't going to be venturing into the woods alone at any point soon.
Well, that's good news. I'm glad you're not going to be doing anything like that. That wouldn't be a good idea. All right, McKenna, let's get into the second encounter you had. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay. So this was about 3 months after the first one. It was about midnight, 1 a.m. I was driving home and I had just pulled into my driveway. My driveway faces my tree line as well, but it's considerably further away, probably 50 or 60 feet away. I had my brights on, so I turn the corner and I pull into my drive, and my brights just completely illuminate the tree line. Before I go on too far, I'll give a little detail about the forest we have in my backyard. My mother and I, we didn't put a fence up. We planted blackberry and blueberry bushes along the front of the trees to kind of create a boundary. These bushes come up to about anywhere between navel or hip height on me, and I'm about 5'9". So back to my story. I pull into my driveway. The bushes are illuminated. Everything is completely lit up, and I can kind of see what looks like a Great Dane hunched over in one of the bushes. I can kind of make out shoulders. I can kind of just barely see the top fourth of its head, kind of just under the eyes, and then up to the ears. The reason I thought it was a Great Dane was the ears. It had very thin, very pointed ears. It was doing almost a shimmying movement in the bushes. It's very hard to describe. It was almost like it was bouncing up and down on its haunches while kind of wiggling its shoulders around. I kind of just watched for a few minutes trying to figure out if maybe this is a neighbor's dog that is stuck in a bush or is lost or something. And, if I sit here long enough, maybe the dog will come to me and I can take it back to the neighbor. So I'm just sitting in my car watching it. My car is still on, lights are still on. And it's just shimmying in this bush. 3 or 4 minutes go by, and I realize this dog is just going to keep dancing in this bush. So I turn my car off. My lights continue to stay on about 45 minutes after my car turns off. So I turn off the car and get out, and my lights are still on. All of a sudden, this thing is completely upright. There was no motion of standing up. It was just in the bush, and then it was standing. I can very, very clearly see that it is not a Great Dane. It kind of just stood there silently, didn't really make a noise, didn't really gesture towards me. It stood behind the bush, and we had a good stare down for a couple of seconds. I could make out quite a bit of what it looked like. The bushes that came to about navel height on me hit maybe about thigh height on this thing. And maybe it was just standing, but its arms were dangling further down in the bush. So on a normal human, when you're standing, your arms kind of stop at your thighs. But this thing's arms just kept going. I couldn't see the end of them. It was a very, very dark black. It wasn't dirty or anything. It almost had like a terrier sort of coat. It had very short looking hair. And the way my lights were reflecting off of it, it looked soaking wet. Like it had just gotten done swimming. I know people say they smell something just awful or they'll feel unnaturally scared. I didn't feel any of these things. So while I kind of felt fear that there was an obvious monster 50 feet away from me, it wasn't something that was unnatural, if that makes sense.
When you say that it was not something that was unnatural, you're saying that it didn't have any supernatural appearance. It looked like it was a flesh and blood creature that was there in front of you.
Yeah, basically. It didn't make me feel any certain way unnaturally. It didn't look unnatural. It looked... If I could describe it, if a Doberman could have a fox snout on the body of a man with black fur. That's the best way I can describe it, honestly.
How long would you guess that muzzle was on it?
6 or 7 inches, maybe.
6 or 7, that's a pretty prominent muzzle. When you describe that muzzle as being fox-like in appearance, what are you saying? That it tapered to a fairly narrow point? What does that mean?
Well, when I first saw it, I thought it was a Great Dane, so I'd expected that large, sort of squared-off snout. This thing didn't have it. It had a very thin, pointed, tapering snout.
Okay, I see. When this was all going on, after it stood up and you could get a better look at its face, did you notice any facial expressions as it was standing there looking at you?
No. We were both completely expressionless, just staring at each other.
Well, at least you got lucky. Some of these things are truly malevolent when they come face to face with an eyewitness, so at least it didn't do that and shake you up any more than it already did. Now, as it's standing there in the bush down on all fours, you mentioned that you couldn't see very much of it at all. After it stood up, though, what kind of body conformation did you notice?
It was almost like a bodybuilder's body, but covered in fur. It was very wide, very stocky.
When you say it was very wide, you are saying that it did have man-like shoulders then.
Yes. It had a bipedal body formation. It didn't have like the shoulders that came down. It definitely looked like it was made to stand on 2 feet like a person.
Was it standing by anything that would give you the ability to accurately guess how tall this thing was and how wide?
I'd say anywhere from 7 or 8 feet tall and at least 3 feet wide. It was massive.
Ooh, that is pretty big. Do you have any estimation on how much it weighed?
Oh gosh, at least over 200. It looked pretty big.
If it was that tall and that wide, it had to be quite a bit heavier than that even. I wouldn't be surprised if it was closer to 3 or 4, but we'll never really know.
I just wanted to give a safe minimum just in case.
As all this was going on, you said it never did make any facial expressions at you. It was just a blank stare looking at you as you were right there staring right back at it. But through all of this, did it ever open up its mouth, or did it keep its mouth closed all the time?
It honestly looked like a photo. It didn't move a muscle. It was completely frozen. And then it just turned and silently walked away.
That's about the best thing it could have done. I'm glad it handled the situation that way instead of coming at you. That would have been even worse. Now, after all this happened, McKenna, who was the first person that you told about this? Did you go inside and wake everyone up in the house and let everybody know, or how'd that pan out?
Well, after it had walked away, I kind of stood there frozen. I wasn't quite sure what I had just saw, or if I should get in the car and drive away, or what. After about a minute of just kind of thinking about what I should do, I went inside. My mom picked up right away that something was wrong. And I kind of just said, oh, I hit an animal when I was driving home. I didn't want to tell her because I had already told her about the attack I had heard outside my window, and her reaction to that just made me not want to tell her about what I just saw.
I can understand that. You kind of didn't want to tell her or anyone else in the house because you were afraid of freaking them out then.
Yeah, and mostly just to kind of save myself because my family likes to pick.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, that does make sense. Really complicates things when something like that happens. When it was standing there as it turned to walk away, it probably gave you a pretty good chance to see if this thing had a tail or not. Did you notice one?
No, I didn't see one.
Okay. Earlier on, when you mentioned that it was down on all fours in the bushes, right there at the edge of the woods, and it was making that strange movement, that weird motion, do you have any opinions on what was going on there, why it was doing that?
Maybe it was digging at something erratically or scratching something, but it honestly looked like it was dancing in my blueberry bushes. That's the best way I can describe it.
As if seeing a dogman's not weird enough. For it to be doing that, that's just really strange and hard to figure out. When it was making that movement, you mentioned how you thought it might have been digging. Did it have its head down or head up? I know you said it was hard to see most of it, but you said you could see the top part of its head at least pretty well.
Yeah, the head didn't really go down low to the ground. That would make me think it was sniffing at anything. It just kind of bobbed up and down and moved side to side very tightly. So while I would think it would be digging, the shoulder movement would make me think it was digging. The head movement didn't match up.
We'll never know because you can't think for these things, but from how you're describing this, it makes me wonder if it wasn't moving like that to get your attention. Since it was black, like you said, it was nighttime, there's a good chance that you wouldn't have even noticed it, but if it made those strange motions, then that would get your attention and cause you to look its way.
It was definitely interesting. I really wish I could describe it more as dancing, or more than just dancing, but that's exactly what it looked like, shimmying in a blueberry bush.
Yeah, that is really strange. Now, in the pre-interview, you mentioned how strange its fur looked. Let's talk about this fur that you saw.
After I had looked up different Dogman encounters, I kind of saw that most of them said that these creatures had really shaggy fur, or there were patches missing, or they were mangy. This one didn't really look like that. It had a very, very short coat, very similar to a terrier, and it looked soaking wet. It was either very short-haired and wet, or this thing had no fur at all and its skin was black.
Yeah, that is awfully strange. What did you notice from its eyes, eye color, anything like that you can share?
It had very large, round, bright yellow eyes that just beamed out of its face.
How directly were your headlights hitting this thing as it was standing there on two legs looking at you?
It was standing almost directly in front of me, and my headlights lit up almost all of it, and I could see a lot of detail. But for some reason, it was making it a lot harder for me to see above the shoulders. I don't know if that was because of the foliage of the tree line or my headlights or something, but for whatever reason, it just seemed like above the shoulders, this thing was much darker or wasn't as accepting of light, but I couldn't make out as many details above the shoulders as I could the rest of its body.
The head, like you said, was clearly darker than its body, but did the body have all one shade to it, or were there splotches?
Just all one solid black color.
Okay. From the way you described its coat and how it had that wet look and it was still dark, I figured that was the case, but I thought I'd ask anyway. You told me in the pre-interview that you've been finding animals around your property in a strange state. What's been going on with them?
Yeah, a few months before my first encounter, so a few months before the spring of 2013, my mom and I had just drove home from camping, and we had pulled in our driveway. There was a lower half of a possum just sitting right in our driveway, and it looked like it had been ripped in half. It wasn't like a clean cut. So we just kind of looked at it. It was very interesting because it wasn't rotted. It didn't smell horrible. It looked very fresh. We could see this almost trail of guts leading to our backyard. So we walked back there and we found the top half of the possum sort of 2 or 3 feet in front of my room, but under my window. Again, like I said, it looked freshly killed. There was no bloating, no rotting, no flies. There was nothing on this thing.
If I didn't do what I do, that would strike me as being very strange, but I can't explain it for whatever reason. That's not all that uncommon for people who have dogmen around their properties. For example, the guest for episode number 9, he's the one that most recently told me about something like that happening. He found a squirrel that had been torn in half like that and left on his patio in a place where he clearly would discover it. He didn't see a dogman do that, but that's fairly commonly reported amongst people in your situation. Going back to your encounter, at any time did you feel any unnatural sense of panic? Now, seeing something like that in front of you, a dogman, that's going to shake anyone up. But when this was going on, or maybe even right before this encounter took place, did you feel this unexplainable, uncontrollable fear that had just hit you?
No, not at all. I drove into my driveway, and when I first seen it bouncing in the bush, nothing made me think something was not right. And even after I had seen it, obviously I was terrified, but it wasn't an unnatural feeling.
At any time, have you ever had any problems with bouts of uncontrollable fear?
Yeah, every now and then when I'm home alone, I'll just be doing something completely ordinary and I'll feel like I just have to leave my house.
Oh, really? Please tell us more about that.
It's only happened maybe 3 or 4 times, and it was in 2013, 2014 when these happened. I would be doing the dishes or in the shower or just watching TV, and something would just make me feel like I was in danger for my life, and I had to leave my house.
I take it no one else was home when these incidents happened.
No, no one was ever home.
Wow. I can't imagine what that would be like. That's not good. Not only have you been having to deal with animals being ripped in half like that and left around your property, you've had this strange kind of activity with birds hitting your house at night. Tell us about that, please.
So around the same time of year, spring 2013, 2014, we all of a sudden had birds just start flying into the windows of our house every now and then. And at first I thought it was just because my mom has tons of cedars out in our yard, so maybe the birds were just flying around to get something to eat and hit a window. But one night I was just sitting in bed around 3 a.m. and it sounded like, almost like someone with a very large hand had smacked my window. I run outside and there's a dead turkey vulture laying underneath my window, and I can clearly see that this bird has crashed into my window and killed itself. I thought that was pretty out of the ordinary for one, just because it was a turkey vulture, and they're not the type of birds to do something like that. But then it happened again. That really set it off that something was not right. After the second turkey vulture incident, we started getting finches, cardinals, mourning doves, just small kinds of birds bouncing into our windows during the day. They wouldn't fly hard enough to kill themselves, but they would just kind of bounce off the window.
That is pretty strange. I live in an area where there are quite a few birds, and from time to time I'll have one hit the window, but not with any kind of irregularity. Before all this Dogman activity started taking place, was it pretty common that you would have birds fly into your windows like that, or did it not start until after the Dogman came around?
I mean, every now and then we'd get a bird fly into the window once every few months, but not to the point where it was happening multiple times a week.
So this was happening multiple times a week. That's pretty often for something like that to happen. Turkey vultures do have excellent eyesight. Tests reveal they have eyesight that's just as good as black vultures. It's just so hard for me to believe that not just one turkey vulture, but two turkey vultures would fly into your window like that. Now, having said that, dogmen have thrown cats against houses. That does seem to be something that they do. I don't know why, but they just seem to do it. From what you're talking about here, it sure makes you wonder if it's not a dogman doing that. I hate to be the person to jump to conclusions and say that everything that's done in an area where you know dogmen are is going to lay at the feet of the dogman. That's why it happened. We didn't see what caused those birds to hit that window, but it sure does make you wonder when you've got a situation like that that just does not make sense to have that many birds hitting your window, and especially having finches and cardinals, which aren't all that active at night. They might fly a little bit, but it's not like they make their living at night. They're diurnal. They do most of their activity during the day.
Yeah, it was very interesting, to say the least. And I guess what made the whole thing even more curious for me is our house is one story. We don't have a second or a third story where a turkey vulture would maybe accidentally hit the window. We are a first-story home.
Yeah, that is really hard to explain and figure out. Like I said, unless it was seen throwing birds into your window, I don't want to necessarily jump to the conclusion that that's what it had to be that was going on and was consequently causing that. Having said that, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Just be careful when you're out in the woods. Don't go alone.
Yeah, no matter what your situation is, that's always good advice. Well, McKenna, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing all those details with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's been great having you here. Have yourself a great night.
Thank you. You as well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I was 12 years old at the time. I don't remember exactly where it was, I only remember it was in the southeast Tennessee region. The area was full of low-lying hills, pastures, and fields, separated by woods, forest with a few creeks, and a bunch of cow pastures had ponds and stuff in them. And there was a ranch-style farmhouse up there. My three eldest uncles took me on up there with their dogs. They had three big old dogs. They were mixed bred between a coonhound and a mastiff. And my youngest of my elder uncles was the one that tended to be in charge of breeding the dogs. Well, three big old male dogs they keep up there with us. And we went inside this ranch house. And it looked like people were still living in the ranch house. They had just kind of vacated the area. I don't know if they did that because they had a deal with my uncles to come in there and try to clear something out that had been messing with their cattle or what, but we went in there and they were gone, and my uncles unloaded the truck and took the dogs, and they took a tiller and a bunch of huge traps that looked to me like bear traps, and some shovels and some of those spiral stake spikes that you twist into the ground for dogs. When this all started, I kind of thought they were just going to stake the dogs out. They didn't do it, though. They just brought the dogs right on inside the house. And every time when they'd go outside, they'd take the dogs with them. And they'd kind of spread the dogs out. Two of them would go off and hold the dogs, and one of them would be working. And they'd plow the ground up underneath the windows. And a pretty huge arc going out around those windows. You know, all the ground underneath the windows. And then when they got them plowed up, they commenced the digging. They kind of scraped off the ground that they had plowed, and then they would dig into the solid ground underneath that about 2.5 feet. And they'd twist these twist spikes in that ground. And kind of hard to twist them in there. I remember them having to use sticks to stick into that loop on top of the spike and twist it to get a better grip. It was kind of hard clay. And they attached a length of logging chain onto the spike. And they attached that to that bear trap thing. And then they'd fill it back in, and they'd set the bear trap down on top of the ground, right about the level of where it's hard. And then they'd put that plowed earth back up on top of it, nice and gentle, so you can't see it, and the whole thing looked normal. And they'd plant some sort of little bush or something around. I think it was just some sort of ornamental thing that they picked up to make it look like they had just plowed it up and turned it into like a little manicured thing to plant something in next to the house. Anyway, between those plants, they would always stick a bear trap. And they'd put a bear trap right there, directly underneath the window. And they'd do the same thing to all those bear traps. They would be attached to spikes that are twisted down into that hard clay, into that hard ground, and buried just underneath the ground to where you can't see them. They never did stake the dogs out. Every time the dogs would start acting up, they'd quit work, and they'd bring the dogs inside, and they'd come inside too. And every time they did that, they'd always stick me in the bathroom. This house had a bathroom towards the middle of it. And I had the window blocked off. The tiny little window that's up towards the top of the wall in the bathroom. They kept it blocked off with a trash bag and duct tape. Make sure nothing could see in. But every time the dogs would stop growling or something at the wall, then they'd go back outside with the dogs, walk around the house, make sure the dogs didn't act up. If the dogs acted up again, they'd bring them inside. If the dogs didn't act up, they would go ahead and continue working until they got all the windows done up the way they wanted them. And they'd come inside with the dogs, and they'd only go outside with the dogs, let the dogs use the bathroom, and then it's right back inside the house. Well, one night, or rather I should say early morning, because I remember it was just starting to get light over towards the horizon. We heard the awfulest screaming and yelling on the side of the house right about where a window was. And something thrashing up against the house, and the dogs were... Before this, the dogs had already started, growling growling and like they was following the wall. But the dogs didn't bark. They didn't bark unless they got something up a damn tree. But, we heard that awful screaming and squalling sound outside. It sounded like whatever was real high-pitched, like shattered glass high-pitched. I always think back to it and think it's a wonder that the windows never did bust out. But they didn't take the dogs out with them this time. This time they went outside with pump shotguns. Several loads, reloads. And I heard them just a-blasting away. Sounded like they were going 2 shotguns at a time. Then another one would take over while they reloaded. They just kept blasting away. To me, it felt like this went on for like 10 minutes. And then it stopped. Screaming stopped like halfway through. But after they stopped shooting, they brought me on out there, and it was getting a bit more light. And they made sure to show me what they had killed out there. It was one of these dogmen. They always seemed to believe that to make something feel more real so you weren't too afraid of it, you had to see it dead. That's what they did. They showed it to me, and they let me go up there and touch it and examine it. Let me pull its lips back and get a real good close look at its teeth and its claws. I like to say what's on its hands, but they look kind of like somebody had taken a dog or a wolf's paw and blowed it up to huge proportions and then stretched all the toes out to become fingers. And it actually had 5 fingers, which is something you wouldn't expect from something that blowed up from a dog's paw. But it had the rough, what looked like chapped skin. You know, the broken type pattern that you see on the pads of a dog. You ever take your dog's foot up and look at it? It doesn't really have fingerprints. It's got a kind of a broken pattern to the skin. Its fingers and the pads of its hands kind of looked like that. And it had these long fingernails that were real thick and strong, like and pointed like claws. And they were like, God, they must have been like an inch or so long, maybe longer, coming out of the fingers. And they were retractable. I remember that. I remember going up there and looking at them and thinking they were like a cat's. They were retractable. They kind of moved a little bit, not all the way, but a little bit inside and outside of the finger, the way a cat's does. When I saw this, I kind of asked my uncles if that thing was some sort of cat. They told me, nope. Look at the head, boy. Does that look like a cat's head to you? Got up there and did a real close look at the head, and it looked like a giant freaking dog. Just looked like somebody had taken a huge dog's head, stuck it there. They didn't shoot the head. They seemed to be concentrating on the body and the legs and the big parts of the arms. And they pretty much made this thing's body look like hamburger. There were a few dimes scattered about. This thing's teeth, I got a real good close look at its teeth. I felt of its mouth, its lips. Its lips were like a dog's. They kind of, dogs got these lips that are, able to go up and down a little bit higher than a human's. They were like that. But its teeth weren't like a dog's. It had canine's teeth the way a dog did, but the teeth weren't like a dog. The dog's teeth kind of are rounded. They're softer edged. They're not as sharp. Dog's teeth don't really have real hard, sharp points on them. But these things did. Both the uppers and the lowers had sharp points. It looked kind of like they were self-sharpening against themselves or something. The ears had little spikes or tufts of fur coming out of the top of them, and they were pointed. But they weren't pointed exactly the way a German Shepherd's were. They were kind of curved a little bit inward from the top. And the eyes were an amber colored. It looked kind of like somebody had shined a light through a glass of beer. The way the beer kind of lights up a little bit, and it's got that kind of amber color to it. The claws on the feet look just like really huge dog paws. But the claws didn't seem to be retractable on the feet. And I don't know if it's just because of death or what, but two of the toes seem to be curled upward. I don't know if anybody's like this, but they ever try to stretch out their toes when they got bare feet, how two of the toes sometimes seem to curl upwards a little bit better than the other three. That's the way this thing's feet did. My uncles made sure I got a real good close look at this thing, felt of it. When I finished examining it, they brought out machetes, and they went to hacking it apart. Cut its arms, its legs, its head, and chopped its body up. They kind of strolled the body out through the woods, and across the fields, things like that, and they left them there. When I asked them about that, they said they needed to do that to make sure other ones didn't come into the area. After that, we left. I never really went back to that spot, or I'm not even sure I'd be able to find that house again. Like I said, I was 12 years old, and I didn't know exactly where it was. I wasn't keeping track of road signs or anything like that. All I knew, it was in somewhere in southeast Tennessee.
So I got in contact with my friends, and I said, "Are you guys up for this weekend? I'm going fishing." They were all for it. Off we went. We get at the fishing hole. It's kind of dark. When we fish, we really concentrate on being as stealthy as we can. Not that we're trying to sneak up on anybody. You know, this river winds and kind of reminds you of being in Vietnam, that the foliage was that thick. You know, this was at the middle of July or so, so, you know, it was summertime, the plants were growing, and this area was very low. If you went down the road a little further, it was all swampy. It gives you an idea of the ground and the soil. I don't think I've ever been there where the soil's been dry. You know, even up on land, the soil's kind of black. But anyway, we get in there, and as you start to fish up the river a little ways, you end up in an area where the river has cut through the land over years and years. You have embankments on each side of you, and they're about 6 feet vertical, and they're mud. So there's really nowhere to go when you're in that river other than walking the river. My one friend and I noticed at the top of the land, you know, looking down on us, was an animal that we don't have in Maryland. It was a coyote. And he was interested in us. You know, mostly coyotes, from what I understand, if they get a whiff of a human, they're gone. This thing was kind of interested in us. We thought, oh, that was strange. And we went down a little further, and we saw 2 coyotes. And we could hear them yipping, so we knew there was more than 2. However, we only seen 2. We didn't feel like we were in any danger or anything like that. We continued to fish with no real problems. You know, we were catching fish and having a good time. We fished up to where we normally fish. It's called the Patuxent River, but there's many, many parts. You got the Little Patuxent, the Patuxent River, the Upper Patuxent. You know, the part we fished in was just little small parts of the Patuxent River. We fished that whole day with, you know, no other problems. One of the men that I fish with, he's deaf. I can sign language a little bit, but, you know, I don't know a lot. The other guy, he's a police officer, and, you know, he's also got a little bit of outdoor experience. I don't think he's got the experience that I have, but, you know, he's been hunting and fishing periodically. But that kind of rattled us both, and I remember talking about that all the way home, because, you know, I would drop these guys off at their house, and we had talked about that. Did we really see coyotes? I know what a coyote looks like. I've seen them, you know, out west. I know the way the dog's built. I know the sound of a coyote, and that's what we saw, coyotes. like I say, they were taking a great interest in us. At no time did they ever try to jump in the river or anything like that. They were curious nonetheless. So we left that day. We had made plans. At that time, I was working every other Saturday. You can't hunt and fish all the time. You got to spend time with the family. September of 2001, we decided we were going fishing. And I remember the excitement of it. We went to the store and bought a few new lures. And, that stuff doesn't excite some people. But when you're a fisherman, to buy a couple new lures and maybe a fishing pole or whatever, that's exciting to me. That's just part of my inventory. I guess we got there about 5:45 in the morning. Still wasn't daylight. So all we had when we go in the water is a pair of shorts, and we used to always wear cleats because, it can be slippery, and the cleats just give you a type of security where you don't slide around so much. And, they dig into the sand at the bottom of the river just like they would dig into the dirt when you were playing softball. We got about maybe an eighth of a mile, 3/16 of a mile up in the river. You got to remember, this river, just doesn't flow straight. It's really windy. And when the water gets high, it erodes places on the sides that when the water goes back down, you're left with like a little baby beach. My friend looked down, there was this track in the sand, and it was a canine track. We all pretty much agreed on that. But the weird part, Vic, was this thing had 5 toes. Not like a dog where it would have 4 toes and then the back pads. This thing had 4 distinct toes, and you could see in the sand, I'm not going to call them fingernails, I'm going to call them claws. They were very, very predominant claws. But at that particular point, we only saw one. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. Well, the big guy, the deaf man, he had looked around and he had found another track right at the edge of the foliage where the undergrowth stopped growing, and that became the river. Found another track right at the very edge. You can tell left from right when you're looking at these. I don't know if whatever this was on a dead run or walking, jogging, what it was doing, but it was 6 feet from that track to the track in the sand. And then it had the obstacle of crossing a small part of the creek, which was about 10 feet wide at that point. We looked around a little more, and we saw the other track where it had hit on the side close to the water. And you could tell these tracks, especially the last track in the sand, was a little deeper, like something had pushed off. And same with the other, it was deeper than probably what it should have been. And that to me adds up as where, it had landed. I don't think it ever touched the water. That was really strange to us, but it didn't really spook us. We said, that's a big animal, because my friend got a Great Dane, and she has some big feet. But when she walks, she leaves her footprints, but she doesn't really leave any toenail prints. Not like this. We kind of discussed it, and I remember the big guy, Bones, with him not being able to speak, he kind of just took his hand and, waved it off like, whatever. He wanted to fish. So we continue up, and like I say, we are almost combat stealthy. The only thing you can hear when we're fishing is when we throw that lure, and the lure hits the water, and it makes that kaboom sound. We fished way up. Way up. We were half a mile, 3/4 of a mile up into the creek, And I know these measurements because this creek crosses under certain roads, and I know how far it is. But if you add in all the curves, it's not just a straight line. It's probably further than a half a mile. And at this point, we're in part of the creek where the embankment is vertical. I don't think you could get out if you tried. You'd have to have a piece of rope tied to a tree, maybe, and you might get up the river embankments because the mud was that kind of red clay that they have down in Georgia, but it was slippery as hell. It was just, real smooth. So we never really messed with it. We're fishing and catching fish here and there, and, there's no talking, and other than the click of a lighter where I was the only one that smoked, the click of a lighter would be the only real noise we would make. And, we would see deer and beavers, we would see raccoons, herrings, all kind of animals. And sometimes we would just stop fishing and watch the animals. Especially, I used to love to watch raccoons, how they manipulate their front hands. They can flip over a rock, catch a crayfish, or a crawdad, whatever you want to call it, and bring it up to their mouth and eat it. And they eat it so fast, they eat it, discard of what's left of it, and start looking for more. To me, being an outdoorsman, that's not something that's just neat to watch. It's something that you can appreciate. If you love the outdoors like I do, you appreciate what comes with it, if you understand what I'm saying, Vic. We went up the creek a little further, and you get to a part of this creek where a enormous oak tree had fallen for whatever reason. The wood didn't break, the roots and all blew over. And I remember the roots being feet above my head. That left a hole, a perfect fishing hole. And, we were excited to get to that point. I think we had made a few casts. If you can picture three men in a river, one to the left, one to the middle, and one to the right. My friend Bones, he kind of froze in his tracks like he was seeing something that he didn't know what it was. Both of us looked over and looked to where he was looking, and I'll be honest with you, whatever it was busy, because all we could see was the back. At that particular point in the river, a small branch, a little tiny creek, whatever you want to call it, flowed into the main river. That was one of the only points to where if you wanted to walk out of there, you could walk out that way and get up on the land and walk out. And I'm looking at this thing, your mind's going a million miles an hour. Can't be a bear because we don't have no bears at this part in central Maryland. I've heard of bears wandering down close, but not this close. But we were on the line of Fort Meade and that wildlife center, so who knows what it could have been. But that all ended when this thing turned and looked at us. I can't speak for the other men, but I can say myself, I was like, this is not a bear. And I did leave something out, I'm sorry. As we were coming up on this spot, we had heard a commotion in the water. We didn't know if it was beavers. Beavers will flap its tail when they see or hear something coming to warn the others. But it wasn't a terrible commotion, just a commotion. And with us walking against the water, and this water was clear enough you could see the bottom. I don't care if you were in 6 feet of it, you could still see the bottom. Very clear water. And we noticed that there was mud in the water. When a deer's in trouble, it'll make that bleating sound. I call it bleating. I don't know, across the country, I'm sure it's used in different words, but in human terms, it's a scream. when we made it to that area, I had saw the rear end of a deer right at the edge of the creek. And this animal was on the deer. When it noticed us, it turned its head and looked at us. At that point, it had made just a few moves to where I could see more of this creature. The middleman, he was a police officer, and the guy we call Bones, everyone, I guess, was trying to do the same thing I was doing, trying to wrap their head around what we were seeing. First, I had thought bear. I think massive dog may have crossed my mind at one time. But anything that can pull a white-tailed deer down like that and hold it down has got to be very strong. Anybody out there that knows white-tailed deer, they can be very resilient, especially when they're fighting for their life. Our deer here in Maryland, we don't have huge deer. They run 120 to 150 pounds. That's big enough. And I challenge anyone to go out and jump on a deer and try to wrestle it to the ground. I would put my paycheck on it that you're going to walk away bruised, battered, and probably with some stitches. As this thing looked at us, I could see off the right side that it was holding this deer down in the water. I don't think it was trying to bite the back of the neck per se, like a cougar or a bear or any major predatory animal. This thing was holding the animal down with brute force with one hand. And when he saw us, he immediately spun around, and the word I'm going to use is ballerina. This thing turned around, holding the animal down with one hand, and in an instant put its foot where its hand was to continue holding the animal down, which at this point I think it was pretty much expired. It had died. And there was a little bit of blood in the water, but not a lot of blood that would indicate that there was a lot of physical trauma to this deer. But there had been some trauma somewhere. I didn't see it. So this thing turned around and looked at us. I can speak for the other men. We all froze. And we froze for a good 3 or 4 seconds. We were nothing but statues in the water. When your brain is looking at something like that, your brain's working at warp speed trying to figure out what it is. Because from what I understand with a lot of scientific studies, when you look at something and you've never seen it and you don't understand what it is, your brain is trying to compare it to something that you already know. Well, this thing was something that I didn't know, something that wasn't supposed to exist. In my time in the woods, I had never seen anything like this. I had never heard about anything like this. You know, I've heard about the boogers. While down south, right on the border with Georgia, I had a booger sighting. It was at a long ways, but, you know, they were accepted. Even my father told me at a young age in the woods when we started hunting, keep your wits about you. Don't just look around you, you know, look up. My father never let on, but I'm convinced that he knew something, and maybe he was planning on sharing it with me when I was a little older. I don't know, because he's passed on now. You know, I don't know what he was going to tell me. But my father was a very good hunter, taught me everything he knew. He was a very good marksman, and he passed all that down to me at a very, very, very young age. So here I am, 30 years later, I'm looking at something that, Vic, it's not supposed to exist other than in movies. When this thing turned around, we do the same thing with animals, usually, as we do with people. We look at the head or the face first to try to recognize what it is. And if you could cross a baboon, hyena and a wolf together, you would almost sum up what the face looked like. It had a mane, not like a lion's mane, but it had real thick fur around the head and neck. And the shocking part was this thing was on 2 feet. It looked comfortable down on all fours while I was dispatching of this deer, but it looked just as comfortable, if not more comfortable, when it got up on 2 feet. I had never heard the term Dogman up until maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago. So I didn't know what I was looking at. All I know what I was looking at was it wasn't supposed to exist. The massiveness of this animal, the body structure. It didn't really have paws. I'm going to call them hands. Not like a man's hand. Much larger, much longer. Almost if you could take a wolf's paw and stretch it out. Stretch the middle part out between the front toe pads and the rear pads. Stretch that part out and then stretch the fingers out. I want to make it very clear, this was the middle of the day. This is not something that I caught in the corner of my eye in the middle of the day, and we're kind of having, at this point, a Mexican standoff. And it wasn't that we were trying to be brave and face this animal, as we were frozen in fear, shock, and I don't think either of us knew what to do. Well, while this thing was standing there, Bones, he kept looking over his shoulder to the embankment behind us. My other friend and I kind of caught on, and we started never wanting to take our eye off of this Dogman, but we wanted to see what was behind us. And we never did see it. We heard it. That's when the fear almost set in tenfold, that we knew that this guy wasn't alone. I mean, to catch a deer in the middle of the woods, you know, a deer can change angles. It could be going one way and make a left turn, make a right turn. And anything that catches a deer in the middle of the woods, and I know how fast a deer can run, has got to have speed, strength, and agility that we just don't understand. Maybe one of the superheroes that, you know, the kids watch might have a chance. But this was a real creature. We had brought some pistols with us, only for coyotes, because, you know, coyotes can be a little vicious. I know quite a bit about firearms. Anything from the smallest little .22 up into the .458 lot elephant guns or the .570 nitros and everything in between. I knew what we had. We would have been better off picking a rock up and throwing it. So we never did shoot. After we could move a little bit and kind of come back to reality, this thing made a bluff charge. With the first millisecond, I didn't know that it was a bluff charge. And everything ran through my mind at that point. Because I knew this thing was built from the ground up, if it chose to, be a killing machine. The speed in which it made those 3 or 4 steps was the speed of I want you to picture a cat that is swiping its paw at something really fast. Like maybe it's trying to, if a dog comes up to it, it might strike the dog in the face with the paw. You don't realize the paw has hit you until it's hit you. You know, you didn't even see it coming. But it stopped. This thing actually looked at all three of us like it was sizing us up. It wasn't just an animal standing there. It had sized us up. You could definitely see at that point that it would make a real quick look across the river. That just added to the fear. Standing in water, I'm not sure, but I really do. I think I wet myself because this is going against the grain of everything that I was taught, everything that I had learned, and a creature that don't exist. But I'm here to tell you they exist. They're real. So the only real option we had in order to get behind us was those vertical banks in the water. But the only way to really get up on the land would be to walk up, brush the Dogman aside, step over what he just killed, and go up there. Well, I got news for you folks. That's not happening. You know, not me. But at the end of its little bluff charge, it growled at us. No barking or anything like that, but it growled at us. We were probably, at the most, when we stopped, 25 feet. And this thing took a 10-foot bluff charge. Now we're even closer. And when it growled at us, it opened its mouth a little bit. I could see the canines, or the teeth, whatever you want to call them. This growl was so deep. The lung capacity of this animal has to be incredible. In order to make that sound and hold that sound, it reverberated through every bone in your body.
Jake, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, there's not anything too extraordinary about me. I've lived in Arkansas my entire life. I'm 26 years old now. Me and my wife were actually expecting our first baby here pretty soon, here in about 6 months. Up until I was, I think, 13, I lived in Searcy, Arkansas. And then after we moved from there, we moved up here to the Ash Flat area, which is pretty close to Hardy, Arkansas, if you know where that is. It's not too far from the Missouri border. Searcy, where I used to live, it's maybe an hour drive north of Little Rock. The area in Searcy was quite a bit different from the area up here where I live now. Up here, there's a lot of mountains, and it's a real rocky area, but Searcy was much flatter and more of a swampy type terrain. Other than that, I don't really know a whole lot else of any significance to tell you about myself.
When you were living in the Searcy area, did any of your family members ever have any encounters with Dogmen? If they did, please don't share the particulars of those encounters with us yet, but just curious to find out if any of them did.
Well, years later, it's actually fairly recently, in the past few years, I've learned that my grandparents had, I wouldn't really call them encounters, but they know of just some strange things that happen around where they live, because they lived just down the road from where we did at the time.
That type of area would be a very good area for a Dogman to hide out, so I'm not surprised you did have activity like you did, like the listeners are going to hear about tonight. You mentioned that Searcy is kind of a swampy area. Not having been down there to know, is there a heavy deer population down there? What kind of food resources would a Dogman or maybe even a Sasquatch have access to?
There was quite a bit of game. There was a lot of turkey and a lot of deer. Actually, the area where we lived, about maybe a quarter mile behind our property, there is a bayou called the Desert Bayou that ran through. It had a lot of fish in it and an ungodly amount of snakes everywhere, just water moccasins. If you were ever walking through there, you had to be careful because during certain parts of the year, those snakes were everywhere, very thick. You wouldn't necessarily see the wildlife a whole lot unless you were out looking for them, but there was a pretty thick population of all kinds of things.
Yeah, in areas like that, I can't see there being any problem feeding something even as large as a Dogman, so that's not all that surprising. Without telling us the particulars of your first encounter yet, how old were you when you had that first encounter?
I was about 12.
Right around 12. Back then, were you into Bigfoot and other cryptids like that?
Not really. The most I'd ever heard about something like a Bigfoot was my dad would tell me when he was younger, when he was in his 20s, he worked around the Texarkana area. And, that's where they have the Boggy Creek monster that, they had that documentary about. He worked in a forest tower, I believe it was, and his job was to watch out for forest fires. And so he kind of lived up in the tower by himself most of the time. And he would tell me about stories that he had heard from other people about there being, some kind of strange creature that lived around there. But other than him mentioning that to me, I didn't really think about it a whole lot at the time.
Yeah, having a job like that, I can only imagine what kind of access he'd have to stories like that. The Boggy Creek incidents had been going on for some time before you were even born. By the time you were 12, I'm sure that the area had quite a bit of activity still, so I'm not surprised to hear that he might have heard stories about things like that going on in that area.
Mm-hmm. What he was telling me about, the experiences he was telling me about, was maybe 20 years before I was even born. Well, maybe not 20, but maybe like 10 or 15 years before I even came along. It was when he was a younger man.
Yeah, that sounds right as far as timing goes. Well, Jake, let's jump right into this first encounter that you had. You said you were around 12-ish or so. What led you to be in the location where you had that encounter?
Well, you mentioned before we lived at the end of a dead-end road. It was a gravel road. The road just kind of stopped and gradually turned into somewhat of like a four-wheeler trail, and that was basically what it was. On the right side of the road, there was a forested area, maybe, 80 acres, 90 acres, something like that, of forest. And then there was another 80 acres of field on the other side of that. On almost all sides of that forest, there was some kind of crop field. I think it was mostly soybean that they had through there. I was walking down this wood line that was next to this particular patch of forest. I was just strolling down the trail there. I've always been kind of an outdoorsy person. I just like wandering around out there. I think at that particular time I was looking for arrowheads maybe, because I remember I found one time, and so that kind of got me in gear to want to go out and look around more just to see what I could get into. I was walking down the trail after it had turned into the four-wheeler trail. I kind of just wasn't paying attention to anything really, just kind of bebopping down there. And I hear a loud commotion coming from inside the forested area. It was off in a distance when I first heard it, but I heard that it was coming closer towards my direction. These two white-tailed deer, they were does, just kind of bursted out of the wood line and took off across the field. They were really booking it, and they didn't pay me any attention. I was maybe 20 yards, something like that, away from them. So they just took off across the road in front of me and took off across the field, because after you got across the field, you would get back to another forested area, which was really thick, and it was unbroken for a long time. So they were taking off towards there, and maybe 3 or 4 seconds behind them, this really humongous dog came running out on all fours. At the time, I didn't think a whole lot of it, other than that it was just really, really big. It was just a really huge dog. And with us having a German Shepherd kennel at the time, I was familiar with how big they were, and this dog was a lot bigger than them. It was even bigger than the deer were. I don't know if you've ever got to stand next to a white-tailed deer, but they'll come up to about your belt line is where their back is. It was quite a bit taller than even they were, so it was a huge dog. It was a little bit misshapen. It looked like its front legs were a little longer than they should have been, and that put a little bit of a slope to its back, almost like a hyena, but maybe not that extreme of a slope, but it was a little bit. But other than that, I didn't think a whole lot of it. After I saw that run out of the woods chasing a deer, it really didn't pay me any attention at all. It never looked at me or broke its stride or anything. As it was taking off across the field after them, I kind of just decided to go ahead and head on back to the house and just call it a day for then.
I can't say I blame you. You mentioned that this hyena-looking dog had front legs that were longer than its back legs. Was its running style ungainly in nature, or did it look pretty fluid?
No, it looked very smooth. To me, it looked like just the way a normal dog would run. Just reaching out a little bit further with its front legs than normal because it had a little bit more of a stride. But other than that, it seemed pretty normal. At the time, I just assumed that maybe one of the farmers that lived down the road bought some humongous exotic dog or something, and it was out running around.
That had to be quite the sight to see. As it's going after those deer, did you hear it make any sounds?
No, I didn't hear the dog-looking creature make any sound. Earlier, when the deers were coming through the woods, I heard them kind of let out that little sound that they make. If something startles them, they'll do that sound. I heard that, but at the time I didn't know what a deer really sounded like, so I didn't know what that was until they came out of the woods. But as far as the dog-looking thing, no, I never heard it make any sound.
What can you tell us about its appearance as far as the coat goes?
The coat was pretty average looking. It was a little bit longer than our German Shepherds would be. It was a little bit more shaggy, but it was proportioned out really similar. It didn't have a really big mane to it or anything, but it had a little bit thicker hair across its back. Portions of it was more brownish, and then it had more darker portions to it. It was broken up between brown and black and just a little bit here and there. But it didn't look really ghoulish or anything. It just looked like a normal, well-put-together animal.
You said it looked like a dog with unusually long front legs. I take it its back legs were canine in structure, or were they more man-like in structure?
No, they just looked like a regular dog's legs, other than them being very big. I remember that this creature, it had very muscular back legs, too. But with something that size, you would just assume that it would. I honestly didn't think there was anything too extremely unusual about that at the time, other than its size and it being a little bit misshapen.
You know how it is. Sometimes when you see something that would normally be scary, for whatever reason, you're not scared at that moment. Blame it on shock, it's hard to say, but when you saw this going on, since its attention was focused on the deer, did a bolt of fear run right down your spine, or were you pretty much just a spectator at the moment?
I kind of felt like I was a spectator. I mean, it did surprise me a little bit when it came tearing out of the woods after him, because I just wasn't expecting to see anything like that. I wasn't even thinking that there was anything chasing them. I thought maybe they had just heard me walking, and that's what made them take off. But no, there was something going after him, and from the way he was running, he was gaining on them, and I'm pretty sure he got at least one of them after they got back into the woods. But like I said before, I wasn't going to necessarily stick around and see what happened after.
Yeah, I don't think anyone could blame you. If you consider the fact that white-tailed deer allegedly top out at around 35 miles an hour, for it to gain on them the way you said you saw it doing, that's a very unnerving thought.
If it wanted to change its attention to come after me, it would have had me in maybe 3 or 4 seconds. It would have caught up to me. I would have never been able to make it back to the house without it getting on me.
Oh, I'd say. After seeing something like that, you knew at the moment that it would never be the same. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, it was concerning even then.
Yeah, I'd say so. Please tell us about this second encounter you had.
I want to say that this was a few weeks later. It could have been a month later. I'm not real sure on my timeline, but our family, we're very much nighttime people because we've all worked night shift pretty much our entire life. We would do like floor cleaning jobs kind of all over the state, and we're just always used to being up at night all the time. So it was around midnight maybe, give or take a little bit. My mother had asked me to run the trash out. So after I was done procrastinating and doing everything but that, I finally went ahead and grabbed a couple bags of trash and started walking it out to the fence. The trash cans were just on the other side of the fence. It was about a 5-foot chain link fence where we kept all of our dogs. I could have just thrown the bags over the fence, but for whatever reason, I always just opened the gate and went outside and shut the gate behind me. So I go outside the fence and I'm lugging the trash bags into the cans just down the fence line from me, because this portion of the fence line ran parallel to the gravel road. And on the other side of the gravel down to the end of the fence and turned where the fence turned. It went into a pine tree grove. Like I said, I was lugging the trash into the can, and I hear something kind of push off of the gravel. Because, you know, the gravel's really audible. You can't walk on it and not make a crunching noise. I hear something really violently push off of the gravel and tear off through the pine trees again. In my head, because I didn't see what did it, I had a flashlight with me, but it was just a real cheap little $3 flashlight. You know, it wasn't like a spotlight. You couldn't really see anything with it. In my head, I'm thinking some of the dogs may have gotten out of the fence or something. It wasn't uncommon for them. We'd have 15 or so dogs in the yard at a time, and it wasn't really uncommon for them to get out of the fence, either by climbing onto something and jumping over, or either digging under and getting out. It wasn't uncommon for them to get out of the fence and run around, just to be difficult. So me assuming that it was just one of the dogs, I take off running over there towards it. I get around the corner of the fence and I turn the corner. I've got the light in front of me and I can hear something moving away from me. As I'm moving towards it and it's moving away from me, I'm close enough to the outside of the fence where I can reach over and touch it. I'm just right there next to it. I'm going through the woods a little bit because this portion of the fence was right up against the pine trees. I am going through there. Two of the dogs are in front of me inside the fence, really going nuts, barking at whatever is in front of me. I just assumed that it was just another one of the dogs. As I'm following it down the fence line, getting a little bit deeper into the pine grove, I get parallel with where our house is, where I could shine the light inside the fence and see where the house is. So I do that, and I see that all but two of our dogs are under the house. I can clearly see them. You know, they're all there. The house wasn't too far from where I was. I counted them, and they were all just kind of huddled under there. So that let me know that whatever I was going toward wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't one of the dogs. I had a little bit of a panic feeling, thinking, oh my God, I could have been chasing anything back here. Who knows? So I turn around and I scuttle back inside the fence and I go back in the house for a little bit. At this point, I'm somewhat curious as to what it was, because it was uncommon for these dogs to get that scared of anything, especially out there. There's not really bear or anything like that. So I go back out maybe 30 minutes later, and I've got my little weak flashlight again. Our alpha dog, Braun, he was kind of the leader of the pack, I guess you could say. He was the daddy dog of everybody. He was kind of staying in one particular area, and it was pretty close to where I was standing before when I shined the light and noticed that the dogs were under the house. So I start making my way over towards him, and I shine the light on him, and he's just going berserk, just really flipping out. He's barking and growling, and he's got like a real viciousness to his barks. So I shine the light over to him, and then I look at what he's barking at that's just on the other side of the fence, and it's another dog, but it's humongous. All I could really see was the head, because there was a little bit of vegetation at this particular spot. There's this humongous gray-looking dog. It's pressing his head up against the fence, and he's actually bowing in the chain-link fence. You know, he's pressing that hard. Our big dog, Brian, yeah, he was this 130, 150-pound German Shepherd. You know, he's a huge dog. He's just going berserk, and he hates that this thing is touching his fence. And he was very territorial. And so he's biting at its head, and he's swiping at it. But this thing is looking past Braun, and he's looking at the dogs that are still under the house. It was almost like he was trying to somewhat intimidate them into staying under the house. And he wasn't really paying attention to Braun, even though he was swiping at his head and everything. There was just a thin layer of chain link fence in between them. I remember this thing's head was, 3 or 4 times bigger than Braun's, and he was a huge dog for a German Shepherd. After I shined the light on it, it kind of ignored me a little bit. It didn't pay any attention to me. After I shined the light on it and I watched it for maybe 5 or 10 seconds, it kind of sprung back and took off through the woods again, and it was gone. So that was something that kind of aroused my curiosity a little bit. I was wondering how there could be a dog that big and why it would be looking at our other dogs that way. He was looking at them like they were a little Debbie snack or something. He just didn't have any regard for them. So I go back in the house again. At this point, I'm kind of freaking out a little bit. I don't say anything to anybody. It was just my mom and my younger brother, who was, I think he was like 3 at the time. They were inside the house. I think she was either giving him a bath or getting ready to put him to bed or something. So I just stay in the house for a few minutes. The more I sit in the house, the more curious I get. The more I'm thinking, if there's really a dog that big, I've got to go try to take a look at it again. I got to see what it's doing, if it's trying to get in the yard to eat the dog food or whatever. I didn't have any idea. So I come back outside maybe an hour after that, after I kind of get myself together a little bit. I've still got this cheap flashlight, but now Braun has turned his attention to the portion of the fence that the trash cans were up against. This is the part of the fence where just on the other side of the fence there's a gravel road, and then immediately where the road stops, the forest starts. He's got his attention up on that part of the fence, and again, he's just going berserk with a really vicious bark. I remember that made an impression on me at the time because I had never heard him be that vicious in the way that his bark sounded. And, he was growling and, foaming, and he was just going nuts. So I walk halfway across the yard, and I'm looking at him, and I start shining the flashlight in the direction that he's barking, and I don't see anything at all. So I walk pretty much all the way up to him. I'm giving him a little bit of distance because he's going berserk, and I don't want him to freak out and turn around and knock me over or something. But I just keep shining the light over there, and I'm talking to him. I'm trying to get him calmed down. But he obviously knew that there was something there, and I just couldn't see it. I'm swiping the light across the wood line, and I don't see anything. And then all of a sudden, boom, just right there, right in front of where I was standing. It must have been on all fours behind some bushes, but I shined the light on it again, and it was just standing there. It was just standing there, and it was looking directly at me. He was ignoring Braun. He was just looking at me. And I could be wrong because it was really shocking at the time, but it looked like it had to be at least 7 feet tall. He had these really yellow-orange eyes, and I could see it from about the waist up. Like I said, he was standing on the other side of some bushes, but it wasn't but maybe 10 yards away from me. It was just however much distance, a one-lane gravel road. That's how far away. He was just standing there just staring at me, and he had his head tilted down a little bit. He was almost looking, like how someone would look over a pair of glasses, that have their head tilted. That's how he was looking. And he had really pointy ears that stood up just like a German Shepherd. And he was gray all over. He wasn't super, super massive and muscular, but he looked well built. The word that I would use to describe the way it looked is just it looked quick. It looked like it could be super fast and agile. When the light hit it and it was standing there, Braun kind of turned his attention towards me, and he starts jumping on the fence where he's hitting the fence, and then he would hit the ground and bounce back up and hit my chest. It was clear that, the dog was trying to communicate to me that he wanted me to leave. He was trying to push me back into the house. And this thing, it didn't hardly move. It just blinked 1 or 2 times, and I could see its ears kind of twitching a little bit, but it was just giving me a really cold stare. It wasn't snarling or anything like that, just a really cold stare. It was like the only reason that it stood up was just so I could see it. That was really disturbing to me, and Braun kept trying to push me back in the house, and at one point he almost knocked me on the ground completely. But he would never turn his attention away from this thing for very long at a time. I shined the light on it as much as I could, even with the dog trying to wrestle me back inside. I didn't say anything. I didn't make any noises. It was just really, really disturbing. And it eventually kind of popped back down, and I could hear it run off again. I didn't see it again. I never saw it really clearly, as clear as I did then. I never saw it like that again. But that was the time that I got a confirmation that it was more than just a big dog.
When it ran off, did it run off on all fours or 2 legs?
All I saw is I saw it dip back down really fast, behind the bushes that it popped up from, and then I could hear it run off. But I couldn't hear it well enough to know the stride because our big dog, Braun, he was still freaking out and going nuts. So he was kind of drowning out anything else.
As you're looking back and forth through the woods with that flashlight, and all of a sudden, boom, there it is. You see it. Did you see motion as it was standing up, or when you hit it with the beam, was it already standing up on two legs?
When I hit it with the beam, it was already up. It was very dark, and the flashlight that I had was too cheap to really illuminate too big of an area, so I swept it over this area one time, and then I swept it back again maybe 2 seconds later, and it was there where it wasn't before. It's like it was watching me from like a lower position in the bushes, and then decided that it wanted me to see that it was there. But I never saw it stand up. Whatever it did very smooth and didn't make any noise.
Did this second Dogman look anything like that first Dogman you saw that day chasing the deer?
I didn't really think about this at the time. I assumed it was the same one, but this one, its colors were different. This one was mostly gray. The one that I saw before didn't have much gray on it at all. It was more tan and black, or maybe like a brownish and black, and it was broken up more. But this one was just one solid color. It was just gray.
Welcome back to the studio. And there you have it. 4 eyewitness reports about Dogman activity in 4 different locations across America. Of course, the first one took place right here in Michigan, though McKenna didn't go into a lot of detail about where she lives. By the way she described it, I would say she lives very close to the Manistee National Forest, which is only about 50 or 60 miles north by northwest of my location. And there are Dogman reports every year coming out of Manistee and the area around it. I myself got a report just a couple years ago from a young woman who grew up on the southwest edge of Manistee. And she told me almost the same story McKenna did, how she was driving home one night from work and passed something strange at the side of the road, and she thought it was just a bear. It never looked up at her. But as she finished the 1.5 mile drive home, she heard something coming through the forest at a dead run and ran in her house. And of course, the next morning when they got up, she found chickens and one of her dogs completely dismantled in their yard. The Arkansas report, right on the Missouri border, could this be what's known as the Ozark Howler? What are these things? Where do they come from? As we moved into the 70s and 80s, we find that these reports increase more and more. And not only oral stories, but stories on social media, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. And I can't help but wonder why there is such an increase in cryptid activity now. Of course, at the time of this taping, we are in the 5th day of a huge increase in Bigfoot sightings in Northeast Ohio. Now, these things all seem to be reported moving in the same direction. But what is causing it? What is causing this huge influx in cryptid sightings? In 4 days, there were 8 reports coming out of Northeast Ohio, and they are covering social media, they are covering the radio, they are covering the television. Is something happening in our world that's causing this increase? That, my friends, is one mystery that remains to be solved. But that concludes this episode of Paranormal Papa Podcast, episode 31, coming to you from Ferocious Feline Studios in Cassopolis, Michigan. Don't forget, Ghostorama 2026 is coming at the end of May, on May 30th, 2026, to Nashville, Michigan, to the Foxview Event Center. Make sure and follow the advertisement at the beginning of this podcast and any of our videos, and make sure and get your vendor space reserved. Inside arena is limited, 10 by 10 spots for $35. Outside in the parking lot are unlimited at $25. It's going to be a great event. It benefits the arena, it benefits the local food bank, and it benefits learning disabled and physically challenged businesses and corporations throughout the area. So make sure and get your stuff in as quick as possible. But that's all we have for you this week. Until next week, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. God bless you, God love you, we do. And happy hunting.